This is Phoenix Talkback. Phoenix Talkback is the world's first Jewish and Chicano radio show. But unfortunately, today, Phoenix Talkback is Chicano-less. So just for today, I'd like to introduce the show as follows. Hello, everybody. This is the Phoenix Talkback, the world's first Jewish and Chicano-less radio show. Okay. So I've got here in the studio with me the author of Santana and Saul. His name is Saul Diskin. Hello, Mr. Diskin.
Good morning, Lou. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And we'll be returning to Mr. Diskin before the end of the show. But I'd like to discuss a couple of things that I've noticed in the news in the past week or so, politically. First of all, Phoenix Talkback, this show, has been in the media twice this past week. There was an article published in Latino Perspectives magazine, submitted by Ruben Hernandez. So I want to thank Ruben very much. Thank you, Ruben. And as a result of this article being published, Horizonte had us on this last week, and the show aired on Thursday. And I'd like to play now for you a short abridged version of the appearance of Phoenix Talkback. That's myself and co-host at the time. Viva represented Phoenix Talkback very well. Let's hear a portion of that show.
Good evening, I'm Jose Cardenas. Tonight, find out about a radio talk show in the Valley calling itself the world's first ever Jewish-Chicano radio show, hopes to strengthen ties between the Mexican-American and the Jewish community. All coming up next on Horizonte. Phoenix Talkback is being called the world's first ever Jewish-Chicano radio show. The hour-long show airs on KFNX 1100 AM at 10 o'clock Sunday mornings and is also available on the internet. Joining me now to talk about Phoenix Talkback Radio is Viva Samuel Ramirez, one of the co-hosts, and Lou Show, the founder of the program. Did you have a sense that you were fulfilling a need by providing that voice on this show?
I do. I do feel that there is a need because we're on the brink of what is not just a Hispanic or a Latino movement, but a Chicano movement. This is about the beginning of an independence in Chicano identity. Resurgence of a Chicano idea. And by doing this, by being present casually among people who talk about politics, about people who are residents here, and my neighbor, as Lou is here in the state, and being proudly Chicano as I am, and understanding that everything I say comes from that angle, and it being okay, demonstrating that it's okay on the show, is where we do need to go. It's that step where people need to become familiar with Chicano, with what Chicanos have to say, and where they come from.
Viva, anything that's come up on the shows that you participated in that made you feel uncomfortable in terms of what the other co-hosts or hosts said?
No, I can't say that's true. I'm there. I'm perfectly comfortable in my perspective. I will say I don't agree wholeheartedly with everything that everybody else says.
And is that expressed as between the people?
We're it's actually an atmosphere where we're encouraged to add in all of these different opinions. And the demonstration there is that this is sort of a sampling of what we want Arizona to be like. We accept that we have different opinions and things, and that we come from different places, and that we can actually have different identities, but in order to live here in peace, in order to have prosperity and the things we want for our state, that we have to be able to figure it out together. And the show is that discussion happening, and it could be an example for the way we want the community to behave out in the public.
Lou, we're almost out of time. The show you just did this last Sunday, I would venture to wager is perhaps one of your more controversial ones, because it focused on Randy Parraz and questioning the monies he got in terms of the campaign, the recall campaign against Sheriff Arpaio, and pretty negative overall. Tell us about how you came to decide on that topic and what kind of reaction you've gotten so far.
Well, when the recall ended, we still had Sheriff Joe. So the name of that series is Where's My Recall?
So part of the concern was it had failed. The effort had failed.
The effort did fail, and
we've only got about 20 seconds left.
I understand that. All I'm saying is that no one is above accountability. No one is above transparency.
Have you gotten any negative feedback so far?
No, actually, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback because they had no idea that what we reported was in existence. America has, and every human being has sort of a hero worship kind of thing, and we cannot let this get in the way of our politics.
Well, it sounds like a very interesting show. And again, for our viewers, it's Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock.
Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock.
Very good. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And that is our show for tonight. From all of us here at Horizonte, I'm Jose Cardenas. Have a good evening.
Phoenix Talkback on Horizonte this past week, the third week of June 2013. And, it wasn't until I got home thinking over the appearance on the show that I think the host, Jose Cardenas, was fishing for negativity. Yes, I think he was fishing for negativity. Honestly, he asked me if had been any negative feedback. He ventured to say that the recent series we did called Where's My Recall was negative as an examination of Randy Parraz of Citizens for Better Arizona. But I'm going to stand by those 3 shows that we did on the recall. And ironically enough, the name of Randy Parraz is related to this next item that I've got, is this new law that Governor Brewer signed. It's HB 2305. A number of people are calling it the Voter Suppression Law. And the Democrats are doing that. Listen to Martin Quezada speak about 2305. He calls it an attack on the Latino community.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here again. Martin Quezada out of District 29, Southwest Maryville, Glendale, and I'm chair of the Latino caucus. The governor today took 1 step forward and 2 steps back, put us right back where we started from. By signing House Bill 2305 into law, she has sealed her fate and sealed her legacy with Latino voters. Senate Bill 1070, signed a couple of years ago, spurred a lot of the voter advocacy and a lot of the voter engagement that brought us to this place where we are today. Latino voters were upset. Latino voters were insulted. Latino voters felt attacked by what our governor did by signing Senate Bill 1070, and they took the right action. They took the right approach to solve this issue, not by protesting, not by marching in the streets, but by voting, by registering to vote, by signing up for the permanent early voter list, by assisting their community members and engaging them to participate in the electoral process, and by showing up at the polls and voting. Their efforts and their successes have now been stifled by the governor signing House Bill 2305. That was an attack on the Latino community with 1070. This is an attack on the Latino community with House Bill 2305. Those Latino voices have now been silenced. Her legacy is now an attack again on the Latino community and a silencing of those voices. What I'm here to say tonight is we are upset, we are disappointed, but we will not forget.
602-277-5369 is the number to call if you have anything you'd like to say about 2305. 602-277-5369. If you are outside of the 602 area code, the number is 1-866-536-1100. Again, that's 602-277-5369. And, I can agree with Representative Quezada when he says that SB 1070 was an attack on the Latino community. It certainly was, and we all saw that immediately, that the method used to determine if someone had proper authorization was to interact with them. And how did law enforcement know who to interact with? What was the guideline? It's clear that Arpaio mostly and MCSO in their sweeps targeted brown people. It's clear racial discrimination. However, this new law that Brewer signed this last week, 2305, I just cannot see how it is an attack on the Latino community. I cannot see it. I honestly cannot see it. And anytime I've asked people for an analysis, all I've gotten is pretty much emotion. Just an emotional answer, nothing concrete. It affects every single voter. It affects every single community. It doesn't say anywhere in 2305 anything about the Latino community. But this requires an examination of a Latino community. Here's my take on 2305, is the section where it prevents political action committees that are not related to the candidate or related to the elections department. It prevents them from going out into the community and collecting ballots. Now, who was it who collected ballots at the last election, made a big grandstanding show about it, and then inadvertently, I believe, as a result of his grandstanding, collecting all these ballots at once, that kind of clogged the recorder's office. And who have we been talking about on this program? And Jose Cardenas, I challenge you to ask this type of question. Why is it that anyone grandstands with ballots and is selective about what ballots they want to collect and who a voter chooses to vote for? Who is it? Randy Parraz and his CBA, as evidenced by this clip I played last week. Here it is again.
So we're here to deliver this thing. This is not the first time we've done this. We've done this during the recall of Russell Pierce. We've done this during the primary. We would defeat him again. We've been here many times delivering ballots on the board. So we collect ballots that we are committed to turning in. You're going to see today us turn over 600 ballots that people have given us the last 4 days to come up here.
I see nothing wrong with putting a stop to any group that goes into the community and tries to influence the way people vote. That's just not true democracy, okay? Let's stop the influence. I also reject any allegation that this new law is an attack on the Latino community by kicking people off the permanent early voters list, unless you want to believe that the Latino community is unable to not only discover this, but put themselves back on, because the law provides a way for any voter who finds out that they've been taken off the permanent early voter list to get back on. The law prescribes that early ballots must be sent out no later than 90 days before the next election. And I think that's plenty of time to find out if you're on the list or if you're not, okay? Remember, the problem initially was last November that the recorder's office was deluged with so many provisional ballots that it took them 10 working days to complete the election. I also see nothing wrong with requiring that circulators pass a background check. And let me tell you why this is important. Because there was an allegation made that some of the people who were collecting signatures were not true registered voters. And the additional allegation came out that some people were entering the community and misrepresenting themselves as from the election department. But when I asked these questions, I got called, I got a racist response. I'm sorry to see that. I got a racist response. Someone said to me, Lou, you're not one of us. This, ironically, came from someone in Chicago. So I would say that she is not one of us because she's not living here and she's not aware of all the participants in politics in the last few years. Regarding the number of signatures that candidates need to get on the ballot, folks, are you aware that there's over 3 million registered voters in the state of Arizona? Certainly in smaller independent parties like the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and any other, they don't have very many members. And it used to be that all a candidate needed to get on the ballot was a portion of the membership of a certain party. But now they've basically aligned it where every candidate needs 5,376. And I think given that there's over 3 million voters in Arizona, I don't see how this is impossible. I don't see how it is unfair, except there is one thing that needs to be fixed about that, is that the provisions do not change who is eligible. Okay, let me say this. Republicans and Democrats are permitted to obtain signatures from independents, but not the other way around. And that, I think, needs to be fixed. That's the only thing I see wrong in that provision. So, folks, I'm sorry to say this, but I do not see how this law is an attack on the Latino community. I really don't. But on the other hand, I'm also very happy to see that the Democrats, I understand 33 Latino legislators signed on to the statement that this law was an attack on the Latino community. I don't care if there's a million. I'm looking at the law. It doesn't make any sense. But I'm glad to see the unity. It's too bad that unity was not available when SB 1070 was being passed. If it had, maybe we would not have gotten SB 1070. I can appreciate the solidarity and the unity, but I really think that the Democrats need to choose their message a little more carefully and not insult the voters with an emotional plea that is not backed up with logic. I'm sorry, I just don't see it. Okay, we'll return right after this short message. We have to pay the bills here on Phoenix Talkback.
Radio? Why should I advertise on radio? There's nothing to look at, no pictures.
Listen, you can do things on radio you couldn't possibly do on TV.
That'll be the day.
All right, watch this. Okay, people, and now when I give you the cue, I want the 700-foot mountain of whipped cream to roll into Lake Michigan, which has been drained and filled with hot chocolate. Then the Royal Canadian Air Force will fly overhead towing a 10-ton maraschino cherry, which will be dropped into the whipped cream to the cheering of 25,000 extras. All right, cue the mountain. Cue the Air Force. Cue the maraschino cherry. Okay, 25,000 cheering extras. Now, you want to try that on television?
Well...
You see, radio is a very special medium because it stretches the imagination.
Doesn't television stretch the imagination?
Up to 27 inches, yes.
Is this your car? Or is this your car? The ASE certified mechanics at A&B Automotive have the expertise to make your car sound like this. You can rely on A&B Automotive to keep you safe on the road. Go see them at 1235 East Dunlap in Phoenix, Arizona, or call them at 602-906-9579. Se habla español. They're also on the web at abautomotiveaz.com. A&B Automotive, 1235 East Dunlap in Phoenix, 602-906-9579. Because you don't want your car to sound like this. You want it to sound like this. A&B Automotive, 602-906-9579. Tell them Phoenix Talkback sent you. Do you have a business or a message you would like to promote? Phoenix Talkback would like to help you. Phoenix Talkback is now available to you to help you tell the world whatever they need to know. When you advertise on Phoenix Talkback, not only will your message be heard on the radio, it will also be heard on the internet for as long as there is an internet, and we think that will be for a very long time. Our creative sound engineers will craft a custom-made, memorable image people will hear about your product or your message. Try us. Try Phoenix Talkback for your advertising needs. Right now, we're new and we're pretty inexpensive. So this is a golden opportunity for you to reach out to the growing number of listeners who are tuning into Phoenix Talkback. Call us at 602-910-4568. That's 602-910-4568 to get with our program and reach all the listeners. They're waiting for you.
Welcome back to Phoenix Talkback. I have here in the studio with me author Saul Diskin. Hello, Mr. Diskin.
Good morning, Lou. Good morning, everybody.
Right. Saul is the author of 2 books. The first book of which I forgot the name of that.
It's called The End of the Twins.
End of the Twins, the story of you and your twin brother, Marty.
Mm-hmm.
And most notably, you've written a book called Santana and Saul, a dual memoir. Am I pronouncing that right? A dual memoir of the relationship between you, a Jewish person from Brooklyn? Brooklyn, right. And who made his way out here to the Southwest and over the span of many, many years, meeting Santana Acuna, a Chicano in California. Now, unfortunately, we're going to take another break real soon at the bottom of the hour, and I would encourage everybody to get ready to call in and possibly ask Mr. Diskins a question at 602-277-5369 or 1-866-536-1100. It's a fascinating story of the relationship between a Jewish person and a Chicano person. And Santana's story is fascinating and does paint quite a very complete picture of growing up as a Chicano in California in the 40s, the 50s. We're talking the 50s, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry for this really intruding break coming up here on Phoenix Talkback, but when we return, we'll get right into your book and who you are and how you came to write this book here on Phoenix Talkback. Back here on Phoenix Talkback, Santana and Saul, a dual memoir written by Saul Diskin, and he's here in the studio. Saul, as you know, this is Phoenix Talkback, the world's first Jewish-Chicano radio show. For starters, do you see a solidarity, a commonality between Jews and Chicanos?
Well, there should be that kind of solidarity between all peoples of every stripe and shade, depending on who they are. That is, people should be determined by their personal characteristics, their character, whether they're Chicano or Jewish or black or Asian. It simply makes no difference. I don't see that there's a natural constituency, but in my observation, when Jews and Chicanos have worked together, have mingled together, they get along very well. Mm-hmm. And they do have certain common characteristics in the history of the country in the 20th century. My family certainly did with Santana's family. They both fled from persecution. Santana's family came here during the Mexican Revolution. They were country people. They had small farm holdings, and they were ravaged by the revolution. They were not political people, and so it didn't matter whether it was the revolutionaries or the government that was marauding them, poisoning their livestock, stealing their farm produce. They suffered terribly, and they came to this country in large numbers. What they did was sort of replace their community in central Mexico. He came from the state of Zacatecas. And they lived in the same sort of recreated farming communities that they had fled from in Mexico. Very tight, very insular. They didn't learn English very, very rapidly, and they maintained their customs. My family came here in 1925, both my mother and father. My father from Lithuania, my mother from Odessa, from the south of Russia, fleeing terrible, terrible persecution. My mother lived through famines. She saw people die in the streets, her friends. She lived through the revolution, the counter-revolution. 2 of her brothers never came here. My father from Lithuania, because they were Jews, they could not own land despite the fact that they were farmers. They were small farmers, truck farmers. And of my father's 5 siblings, 3 never made it to this country. I found out later his brother and wife and children were transported to the Ukraine, where they all died of starvation. During Stalin's program to create a rural proletariat in which he murdered 3.5, 4 million people. And so when my people came here in 1925, they did for the same reasons that Santana's people did. It was a land of opportunity. They were both very fortunate in that they came here at times when unskilled labor was in demand. And so the immigration laws were just simply overlooked. Among Jews, it's a very common thing for their last name to have been changed at Ellis Island when they got off the boats traveling steerage. And so the names, they were never challenged. My father's family name was unpronounceable in English. When somebody said Diskin, it was perfectly okay as long as they let them pass through to the New World. And so when they were here, they found opportunities that they never found in the old country. And they, in my family, although Yiddish and Russian and English were the three languages spoken at home, my parents didn't want the children to learn either Yiddish or Russian.
Well, in my family, my parents would speak Yiddish to each other to mask what they were saying because they did it in front of the kids. That's why it wasn't taught to us kids so much directly at home. It's because it was the parents wanted to talk with each other. Did that happen in your family? Did your mother and father speak Yiddish in order to hide what you were saying from the kids?
Yeah, they did, but they couldn't hide it in Yiddish because we all learned Yiddish pretty quickly. They had to retreat to Russian. And,
okay.
and there I have a very, very faint knowledge of it, mostly of the swear words.
Right.
With Santana, Spanish, that is standard old country Spanish, was what he was raised with. He didn't speak English till he was 10 years old. He was the sixth child born to his mother, and his father died 10 days before he was born. His father was a field worker. He died of pneumonia. And Santana's mother gave him away to her mother to raise. He didn't see his real mother till he was 6 or 7 years old, when he became aware of her and wasn't rejoined with her until he was 10, at which time she had remarried, had 3 other children, and a stepfather who hated him. He lived a Dickensian childhood. He was beaten and abused. He was sent to public school where he couldn't speak English and was denied every opportunity because of that. At some moment when he was being beaten in school, he was a peaceful child because his grandmother just loved him and lavished her love on him. And he didn't know any other children, didn't know English, didn't have shoes till he was 10 years old. At school, one time, the many times he was beaten, he picked up a rock and smashed his tormentor's face in. He realized in that moment that there was a very curious balance between fear and respect. And from that moment on, he wasn't bullied, and that sort of set the course for his adult life. That sort of led him to become a criminal, a violent criminal. I met him in a mental hospital in California called Camarillo State Hospital.
Yes, let's back up here a little bit. This is a fascinating book. I couldn't put it down. The architecture of the book is sort of a simultaneous story written from the perspective of the two of you. So, and also included in the book is the story of the writing of the book. It's not so elaborate that it overshadows the content of the book, but it was an interesting experience on many different levels for me to read this book, to learn how this book was made and to learn Santana's story and your story. And so we learn about how he grew up and what it was like to grow up as a Chicano in 1950s California. And we also learned how you met him. You were working in a mental hospital in California. And would you care to reveal why you were there originally?
I was hired by Pat Brown, the present governor's father, who at the time was Attorney General of California. There was a celebrated, notorious case of a mental patient in a hospital called Atascadero who was force-fed and asphyxiated and died. Brown, as Attorney General, was so personally offended that he wanted an investigation done of the mental hospital.
Now, we're talking about Pat Brown, who eventually became governor, and now currently his son, Jerry Brown, is the current governor of California.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And I was hired, and I went into Camarillo State Hospital, which was closer to where I lived, near Los Angeles, as a psychiatric technician, just as an employee. There I met Santana, who had accepted a voluntary commitment for 90 days in lieu of being sent to a California prison for possession of drugs. He had become a heroin addict at the age of 17. I met him at 23, and there, in that mental hospital, we became friends.
But you need to add that the reason why you were at this mental hospital is that you were investigating abuses.
Yes.
You were an investigator, so you were playing a dual role, and you met him one day when he was trying to kick the habit. You showed him a matter of kindness, and this is something that he never forgot. But why did you never forget him? What kind of impact did he make on you when you met him?
Well, it's difficult to explain. We simply became friends. That is, I was not overtly trying to show kindness to him. We became friends.
Right.
He was a person whose character attracted me and mine to him. And despite our different backgrounds, we simply became friends. When he was, but I did conceal from him the fact that I was an undercover operator,
right,
because I was taking covert films and tape recordings to gather evidence, not about crimes, but about abuses that the hospital system inflicted upon its patients. So when Santana was released, it was a very tough moment for me, because I knew he was a violent person, and I had to tell him that I was then an undercover operator. His first reaction was that I was sort of a snitch.
Right.
And I had to tell him that every time somebody would tell me something that was incriminating, I would walk away and erase it if I was recording it. I never, ever once passed along incriminating information. That's not why I was there. At the same time, I was going to Arizona, exploring, making a new life here. I was 23 years old, raised in Brooklyn with all the arrogance of 23-year-olds, and I decided I was going to be a farmer in Arizona.
Right. I think it might be because, as you mentioned earlier, growing up in Lithuania, Jews were not allowed to own land, but here you could in the United States.
Right.
And you invited him to come and join you.
Well, he sort of insisted, because it was his way of paying me back for what he considered my kindness to him.
Wow.
And he came and we worked together in the desert. The Harquahala Valley is about 50 miles west of Buckeye, where my wife and then one child, second on the way, moved. And Santana's, one of his daughters got ill. He got a letter from his wife. He went back to California, and from that moment, for 48 years, we had no contact.
This is amazing. You must have thought of him all those years.
I thought of him all those years. I made every effort to contact him, but it was impossible. He simply disappeared. In 2005, I got a letter. For some 20 years, I was a director and chairman of the board for some time of a thing called the Florence Project,
mm-hmm,
which gives free legal assistance to people detained by the immigration services in Florence and in Eloy. And as a result of having written my first book, I was shown on Google, and I got a letter from Santana, not even knowing whether I was the same Saul, as he calls me, from the early days. And then we had an emotional reunion in which he told me that of the previous 30 years, most of that time was spent in prison for violent crimes. In 1981, Santana, in the Los Angeles County Jail, quote, became a Christian, close quote. And from that moment till the present, he has led a life of trying to help people like he used to be. He has never used drugs. He has never committed a crime. He has never used alcohol or tobacco even. He's an evangelical pastor of a very...
Well, he hasn't used those items since becoming a Christian. He had an epiphany.
That's correct.
And the evidence that convinced him that this epiphany was so strong is that during the time he had to go through withdrawal, and what was that called in Spanish? Las Malías, excuse me.
Are the withdrawal symptoms.
And when he went through withdrawal systems after he found his faith, he found that he wasn't pained by that. Now, folks, we're talking about someone who was a habitual criminal getting right out of prison and getting right back into that groove. Getting right back into that groove of seeking out heroin and conducting robberies in order to finance that heroin addiction. He became what's it called, a gramero?
Well, a gramero is one who uses a full gram of heroin every day.
Right.
Or a marrano, which means a hog. He used so much heroin, it would have killed other people.
That sounds familiar. Weren't the Jews that were kicked out of Spain also called Marranos?
Yeah.
And weren't the Jews who were exterminated during World War II reclassified as vermin? And therefore, the act of exterminating the Jews in Nazi Germany was less painful for those who conducted that. Seems as though we're always, not we, but it looks like oppressive governments are trying to reclassify people in order to impose their will on groups of people. It happened to the Jews. Looks like it happened to Marranos, as you said, or anyone in the Chicano community who's devalued. It's happening nowadays when the undocumented are called illegal aliens. Now, you can't get any more dehumanizing than that. And I think this is something that Chicanos and Jews have in common.
Well, I think it's a characteristic of all oppressive governments that you first demonize those people that you wish to cause to suffer or exterminate. In the early 20th century, Jews were demonized in this country. They were filthy, they were ignorant, they were mentally defective. If they came here, they would poison our population. Some of the same things are being said about Latino immigrants today. By the way, illegal alien is a legal term. Sometimes it's accurately applied, sometimes not.
I do know that, but I think even that needs to be stricken from the lexicon of legal terms.
Well, it has overtones that are very unpleasant.
Right. Even the AP is not using that term anymore. Neither are they using the term illegal immigrant. And for anybody listening to my voice right now, if you're thinking that this is okay and that words don't matter, they do matter.
The same arguments are being used against Latino immigrants as have always been used by the nativist people in the United States. And most of the things that they assert are simply wrong. A, they don't learn our language. Study after study has shown that, for one thing, English as a second language courses over the country are so burdened there are waiting lists. People are anxious to learn English. Secondly, in the first generation of native born in this country, English becomes the primary monolingual language and Spanish a second one. In the second generation, Spanish fades away just the way Yiddish and Russian did to me in my family.
You see, that disturbs me. I don't like to see anything get lost. And any time that the United States exports culture around the world through movies or TV programs, the indigenous population loses something that they've had for hundreds or thousands of years.
There's a price to pay for assimilation. I share your view, but you simply can't have it all. And the youngsters, I experienced this, felt somewhat mildly ashamed that their parents weren't real Americans. My parents spoke with an accent. And so I wanted to be away from that culture as far as I regret it now, because I'm not a Russian speaker and I'm not a Yiddish speaker, although I'm somewhat conversant with it. Those would have been nice additions. But we're seeing people who came from Spanish-speaking backgrounds now in the second generation to barely speak Spanish.
Tell us more about Santana and reconnecting with him. He discovered you wrote a book about your brother Marty.
Yes.
And so it looks like he was on the lookout for you.
Yes, he was, and he told me that he never stopped thinking about me, just the way I never stopped thinking about him all of those years. We had this very emotional reunion. We decided to get together more, and he told me the story of his life, of his criminal activity, of his conversion to Christianity. And he suggested that I write a book about it because I had already written a book. What I told him was that as a non-believer, as a secular person, I mean, Jewish by culture, by background, but I'm a secular Jew, that I would be the wrong person to write about faith. And what I did consent to do was to go to where he lives. He lives in Rancho Cucamonga, just outside of San Bernardino, 2 miles from where he was born and raised. And to tape record him for an entire day. We had an exhausting day, maybe 8 or 10 hours, and I drove back to Phoenix, my brain afire with what I put on tape, and just made some sense out of my notes, and I was completely hooked. I wrote the book to begin with for him, to call attention to his situation and possibly to raise some money for his church efforts. So I wrote it as a Christian book in which I was not a character. I submitted the book to 84 self-identified Christian agents who all turned it down because they felt there was too much sin and not enough redemption, which I found mystifying. So I rewrote the book, in which I called it a dual memoir, a story of both of us, where our lives are shown in parallel from the time we met until the present.
I'm glad you did. And speaking of redemption, I have the example that I hope would prove to all that here's a man who was redeemed. You got an email from him one day, and it read as thusly. How did he pronounce your name? Saul?
Saul. Yes.
Saul. Okay. So I'll replicate what he's saying. Saul. Yeah, I don't understand the marks on Spanish words.
Except over the U.
Right? If I hear it once, I know how to pronounce it. But he wrote to you, and he wrote, Saul, check this one out. There were two young guys in one of the houses, and one of them said that he will never go to Africa and sell shoes because nobody wears them. And the other guy said, well, that's where I am going to go sell shoes because I will sell them to all the people who do not have them. And given what you said earlier is that in the first number of years of his life, he didn't even wear shoes.
True.
So now we're talking about something practical and tangible that he is seen as a parable for the application of his redemption in his life.
Yeah, you could certainly read it that way. Santana always talks in parables. He knows the Bible very well. In fact, when he talks to me, he usually end a conversation where he asks me if he can talk to the God of Abraham and Isaac, and because it's Old Testament. He always makes a gentle effort to convert me to Christianity. One day, and it always sort of bothered me, although he does it in a very light and gentle way.
Uh-huh.
One day in August, we were talking on the phone. He asked me how hot it was, and I said 115 degrees. He said, man, that's hot. I don't know how you can take that. And I said to him, Santana, it's good practice for an old pagan like me to get used to the place I'm going to go to after I croak. And Santana thought for a second, and he said to me, Saul, he said, I've got a couple of tickets on that boat. One of those seats is reserved for you.
Yeah.
So even though he's an evangelical, he's very tolerant, very, very light with his touch. He just wants to help people.
Well, is there any is there any comparison between his life, someone you know, and the story of Job, the man who never lost faith? Once Santana got his faith, he never lost it.
Well, that's true. I mean, Job had a different background, but that's correct. Since Santana became a Christian in 1985, at the age of 51 years, he never, ever has backtracked. And when you talked about his kicking at the end, he considers that one of the miracles. He did not have withdrawal, he says. Now, Santana has made a number of claims, which I told him at the beginning I would be skeptical about and I would have to be convinced about. One of the things I did was negotiate with the state of California for his prison transcript. It took me the better part of a year, and I finally was able to get his 350-page California prison transcript. Every date, every charge, every plea bargain that he told me about that's in the book is accurate to the date. His recall was absolutely encyclopedic. He never, ever sought to minimize the harm he did, but he said that was in the old days. He's a new person now, and he truly is.
And we're talking about someone who was a hardcore heroin addict.
Yes.
And he compared his revelation, is that the word, or his epiphany, or his religious, I don't know what you call it. He compared it with getting high. He asked the question, he said, God, you help everyone else, but why don't you help me? Then a feeling came over him. A physical feeling of peace came over him, and it was just as strong as the first time or any other time he had ever used heroin. And at that point, he realized, he writes here, or you write here, that he was home.
Mm-hmm. In the description of God and his faith, at the very end of the book, I cover this a little bit, he said to me, he said, Saul, he said, you have never experienced God, so I can't tell you in words what it is. But I will tell you this. You've experienced sex. You know that sex is wonderful. You've never experienced heroin, but I will tell you it's 100 times better than sex. You can't know that because you've never experienced heroin, and I will tell you that faith in God is 1,000 times better than heroin. It was one of the most powerful descriptions I ever heard.
Sounds like an authentic person.
Yes.
And I think we all look for authenticity. And what is really important here, as I said, is that the solidarity between Jews and Chicano, I think it's a lot more authentic and real than anyone might ever say to the contrary.
Santana and I call each other carnal, which is slang meaning friends as close as brothers.
Uh-huh.
He said one time that we're twins of different mothers.
And you know what's really amazing? Reading this book, I learned a number of new Spanish words because it was set in such a way to tell a story I could identify with. I can't really identify with becoming a heroin addict, but I think it was written rather well. And you wrote a very good book, and I'm glad you were able to reconnect with him as a result of your writing. It's a blessing, and I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking to us about it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Okay, folks. Thank you for tuning in today to Phoenix Talkback. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye, everybody.